Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and my friend from Texas. You always have some amazing stories. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, tonight is going to be a little tricky because I'm going to try to weave sort of three major subjects together. And some of it's going to be really technical. Some of it will be slightly sarcastic. But the math here is really important. And I'm going to do it backwards from how I originally thought, because I want to hit a couple things that are remarkably important. All right, so I've come behind this microphone, heaven knows how many times, and shown the charts, hey, we're borrowing, $72,000 a second, that we could borrow as much as $2.3 trillion this year, that and I'm going to show some other things in here, Moody's, and why did they downgrade us? That what some of the things going on, and on occasion I get this of, okay, what are your solutions? And then we always try to come in saying, okay, here's the technology shoot where you could disrupt the cost of healthcare. Here's the technology where you could change the price of delivering government services. But we started almost a year ago in my capacity on Ways and Means, chairing the oversight. I now chair the Joint Economic Committee, and thank you, Mr. Speaker, because he helped me actually have the capacity. I've hired a PhD in healthcare economics. We've dropped last week, and that's the term we put in, something called a hopper. That's actually where you file your pieces of legislation. Two pieces of legislation that the preliminary scores are almost $2 trillion in savings over 10 years. So as we're having this discussion of debt deficit, can you extend the tax policy? Can you do other things? It's not going to come from traditional austerity. The fact of the matter is that math doesn't work. You're going to do it through policy. You're going to fix policy. And people just stare at you like you're an idiot when you try to explain these things. So let's walk through our big one. And look, this is an occasion where I promise you, there's so much money involved. There's a reason other members of Congress have been unwilling to do what we knew was a problem. A few weeks ago, I came here with the MedPAC reports. Now, I don't know if anyone ever bothers to read them, but you go through there and it should light your hair on fire. For the last year, the Wall Street Journal has done a series of articles basically showing hundreds of billions of dollars of waste, fraud, misallocation, just misalignment incentives in something we call Medicare Advantage. So walk with me through. In the early 2000s, there was this concept of managed care, that if we could help our brothers and sisters with their earned benefit in Medicare, saying, look, we have fee-for-service, but you have to pay all these co-pays. But what would happen if you could align the incentives, saying, we want insurers to manage a portfolio of access to health care, but within that, those insurers will actually make their money by helping you be healthier. The model, which started in 2005, many of you know it as Medicare Advantage. You see the ads, and that's actually part of the problem, was supposed to come in at 95% of fee-for-service, because this was a system where you were going to get better quality care, get taken care of, and the insurers would make their profit by helping their population become healthier. Well, it turns out, if you actually read those MedPAC reports, these are the auditors who do the modeling, and we're talking something, it's almost $1 trillion in spending last year. So we're talking something, it's stunning amounts of money. Last year, Medicare Advantage came in at 120% of fee-for-service. So just that delta, 120% to the 95 it was envisioned to be, that right there is $100 billion a year. And the fact of the matter is, if you've been following this series of articles, I think ProPublica, Wall Street Journal has spent tremendous resources doing it, it will curl your hair. And then you've been seeing the most recent stories about the potential criminal acts. I think last Thursday a story broke of actual criminal, not civil, criminal coming. So is it time for us as members of Congress to talk about something which is often dangerous, because when you're taking on a system that has trillions of dollars flowing through it, you got to understand, there will be ads in my district that are going to beat the ever-living crap out of me. It's the job. You got to tell the truth, know the math, and come with actual solutions. So we went back and said, hey, how do you design a system where you make sure the benefits, the promises are there for seniors because it's an earned benefit? How do you make sure you're doing nothing to cut that access to health care, to cut that access to quality health care, but you align the incentives to go back to the original vision where it's about helping those seniors who are on Medicare Advantage become healthier, and the morality of that. Now, we had to do a number of things in design, so we introduced legislation. This was the preliminary score from the Joint Economic Economists. $1.76 trillion of savings over the 10 years. Now, the fact of the matter, that's only about 10% of the cost of the program over those 10 years. So you start to understand the scale of the cost of this. We believe, now understand, this is only conversation between economists, and I was not on the call, that the preliminary score right now is $1.84 trillion coming from the people that will score the legislation. That would make it probably, everything we can guess, the single biggest reduction in spending in a single bill in probably U.S. history. Does that give you a sense, when you have people talking about waste and fraud and misalignment and bad acts, this is the ginormous granddaddy of it all. So how do you actually take a piece of legislation it's not that big a bill. It's a little complex. It's really scary because, as you know, around here, we're not ever supposed to talk about, these things that, particularly Medicare, but this is not Medicare as you think about it. This is the insurers who are paid to actually manage your care and help you be healthier. And yet you have the series of stories saying on how they've been taking advantage of the system. And there's a way to make this work. Even the MedPAC report says, we support Medicare Advantage. We want it to stay, but we're going to have to fix these misalignments. And the economists have been modeling the savings. So what happens if you have a moment here where these sorts of dollars in savings, and this is going to tie in, Mr. Speaker, to talking about what Moody's did last week, talking about how this and our talent-based immigration bill, those two bills together, probably score at $2 trillion of savings, and they would be good for the economy. They would be good for healthcare. They'd be good for people to be healthier. They would help grow the economy. This is an example of getting policy right to actually take on a small sliver of the debt. Because remember, our baseline debt for the next 10 years, we're going to borrow another $22 trillion. So even though this number is massive, still just a fraction of what's coming at us. And look, I'm trying to make the point again. Our legislation, which we call Better Medicare, it's been introduced. It's in the process of being scored. But when you start to see these sorts of dollars, and yes, it would change the current spending projection by about 10.7%, according to the Joint Economic Economists. But you already had the MedPAC saying it's already 25% more expensive than was the original model. So it gives you a sense that we're making reforms, but we're just trying to align the incentives. And we've done some things to actually help the insurers be able to have sort of automatic enrollment, but you can choose to opt out. A longer period of time, so the investment for that senior who chooses that Medicare Advantage plan to be given the services to be healthier. But also with that healthier, the provider, may benefits by having a healthier population. We've been trying to just think like economists instead of so often what you hear behind these microphones. Because something I've teased about, I actually talked about this a couple weeks ago, there's in Nature Human Behavior, there was an academic article, and this is one of those geeky ones that's peer-reviewed, all those things. Computation analysis of U.S. congressional speeches reveals a shift from evidence to intuition. They basically took 240 years of House floor speeches, ran AI across them, and said, hey, guess what's happened? These speeches around here no longer talk about facts, about data, about math. We now tell our feelings. The problem is if you have complex problems, your feelings aren't going to help us fix complex problems. It turns out math does. And this is what we've been trying to do on this reform of Medicare Advantage. We want the system to work, but we can't allow $1.75 trillion over 10 years of fraud and bad acts. And if you don't believe me, get in front of your computer right now and look up some of the articles of the potential indictments, the criminal activities that are coming. But even the Wall Street Journal series that actually talks about people being scored as sicker, and they don't have the diseases, they don't receive services, they're not on those medications, but yet you and I as taxpayers are paying for it, and we're borrowing the money to do it. Please, if you're a staffer watching this, if you're an American that actually cares about us getting our act together and doing things better, if you're a member of Congress, look, I know doing big things around here is terrifying. We don't have a choice anymore. When you start to see, if anyone actually read the Moody's report that was put out last Thursday, they make a couple points that should scare the crap out of us. In 9 budget years, they believe about 9% of the entire economy in that year will be borrowed by the federal government. That's $3.8 trillion will be the borrowing amount in 2035. And that's just sort of our baseline. And the reason we often don't tell the truth, we avoid it, is almost all this growth of this borrowing is interest and Medicare. It turns out it's really not Republican or Democrat, it's demographics. But we're so busy trying to get elected next time, we need something to blame them, they want to blame us. So if you stand up here and try to actually fix problems, you will get the crap kicked out of you, but you're at least trying to do the right thing. This is what you're hired to do on this job, is not pander to your voters, tell them the truth, and try to fix things. I can't tell you how many speeches I hear behind these microphones. People tell you the problem over and over, but they'll never spend a year writing a bill, putting about 100 hours into it with academics, with PhDs in healthcare, experts from the industry, put together a bill and says, this will work. This will make things better. And look, here's something it should just a philosophical thought I want everyone to think about. The United States just got downgraded by the 3rd major credit rating agency. Did you know there's 18 states that have higher credit rating than the United States government right now? 18 states have higher credit rating. Yet, every dime a member of Congress will vote on, every dime of discretionary, non-defense discretionary as we call it, is borrowed money. Every dime of defense is borrowed money. About $400 billion, I believe, last year, what we call mandatory spending, the formulaic, earned benefits, things of that nature, is borrowed money. Last year, for every dollar we took in tax receipts, we spent $1.39. And much of that money we're sending to states. Remember, we're borrowing money. So my state of Arizona, and we do some things actually really well. Our Medicaid system, we call Access, is actually remarkably well run. Except for some of the fraud, but I'm going to touch on that we haven't built the models to catch faster because we're not actually incentivized. Now, we also play incredible games where we use a provider tax. We actually make money for the general fund, more than is actually spent on health care, which is one of the great scams we're trying to fix right now, is what happens when the washing machine is actually a way where you're padding state budgets instead of taking care of health care. But that will get protest with. So think of this, 18 states that we borrow money have higher credit ratings than we do. It's just an interesting thought experiment. How about if I told you that I think it is, as of yesterday, it's either 12 or 13 countries can sell a 10-year bond cheaper than the United States. Greece today can sell a 10-year bond cheaper than the United States. If any of you are paying attention, remember, there's this concept of interest fragility. One of our greatest threats to this country is our ability to finance this debt. Today, both the 20-year and 30-year bond, both either went over or touched 5%. We showed actually a couple months ago that a single point of interest on U.S. debt over 10 years came in like $3.3 trillion of additional interest. So it's bigger. Just a small movement of interest rate is bigger than everything we're debating here. But we're not going to tell you that. A, because it would require math. B, it would require facts. And C, it might actually mean someone has to do something. So there is an economist at Bloomberg, Anna Wong, truly freaky smart. I've had the opportunity and the honor. She came and spent a part of a day with my joint economic economist. She's been at the Federal Reserve. She's been at the White House. One of those people is just intimidating on how she's able to calculate the world. And she actually was looking at our reconciliation budget. And she says if we will do just a couple policy things, it's neutral in cost. It balances out. That's the point I'm standing here for. We cannot allow the taxes to go up on working people in this country. Well, right there, that's $3 trillion, $3.1 trillion. How are we going to offset it? Well, it turns out, if you take a look at, and this is just from Anna Wong's analysis, and if you're really geeky, you can get this on your Bloomberg terminal. So all 6 people in Washington have a Bloomberg terminal. They're really expensive, but I actually need it for what we do. If you actually, if the tariffs, what they're producing, some of the DOE's offsets, turns out if we will incorporate some of this policy, we can make this budget neutral. And that's actually part of my request often for the leadership, for the committee chairs, for those of us in Ways and Means. We need to start actually pulling out our calculators and thinking this through. How do we do these things so we can stabilize the economy, maximize economic growth, but not be adding to the debt? There is math that does it. Will anyone actually read the documents? And we actually start to walk through this. So we're actually trying to build models right now on trying to see what's coming in custom duties. That's the tariffs. What is that offsetting? And we're trying, and you'll see me over the coming weeks come with charts and start saying, okay, here's what we have to plug into our models. But for everyone who's been whining around here, here's your math problem. And I would wish they would start the whining with telling the truth on math and facts before telling anecdotes and stories. Because remember, I just pointed out to you the 140 years analysts of these speeches here in Congress, how they've become now about feelings instead of facts, because we can manipulate you with telling anecdotal stories. This simple chart here, see the nice coins? We stole this from someone else. Baseline is we're going to spend $86 trillion over the next 10 years. All we're talking about trying to save is $2 trillion out of that 86. You're telling me we can't get $2 trillion out of 86 over 10 years. This is causing the emotional meltdown here because this place only cares about one thing, it's the money. Spend it, spend it, spend it, and basically screw over people's retirement and my kids. I have a 2.5-year-old and a 9-year-old. When my 2-year-old, yes, I know, my wife and I adopted some kids. It's the greatest thing we ever did. But when my 2.5-year-old is basically 23, 24, every single tax in America has to be doubled to maintain baseline spending. And I've done presentation after presentation where I've come here with the actual charts using Democrat economists showing that every tax hike the Democrats have proposed on the wealthy, everyone, capital gains, income, all the entire plethora produces about 1.5% of GDP. All the austerity, the cuts on our side, accounts for 1% of GDP. So you got a big 2.5%. Mr. Speaker, we're going to borrow about 7.3% of the economy this year. And I showed you a chart a little while ago that Moody's has us in 9 budget years borrowing 9% of the economy. Anyone see a math problem? The rhetoric here, the moving of the mouth, doesn't match what's on the calculator. We make crap up. This is the baseline fact. Baseline, we're set to spend $86 trillion over the next 10 years, and all we're trying to do is reduce $2 trillion. Now, I think we should reduce dramatically more, but I think you can do it through policy, the adoption of technology, the alignment of incentives, and actually make the delivery of government services work. When only 31% of the phone calls at the IRS get answered, are we doing our job? You do realize there's technology that would fix that, but that would actually turn and anger the union of the government employees there. So there's these barriers here where you have armies of lobbyists walking up down these hallways, and the inefficiency, that waste and fraud, is their profit model. Understand 80% of the spending growth. We're not supposed to tell people this, but it's the math. And you can't do policy unless you're willing to tell the truth of math. 80% of the spending growth over the next decade. Social Security, Medicare, interest. And the interest is now scaring the crap out of us. Because there's this concept called term premium. As the Ray Dilios and these people who are the billionaire experts start saying, hey, China's in the market, Germany's in the market, United States is binging on debt. There's almost not enough savings in the world to finance the scale of borrowing, and much of that borrowing is driven because of demographics. The entire industrialized world got old. We have a shortage of young people. I think the math is in 9 budget years, 23% of America is 65 and up. So are we doing the things to maximize automation and growth so we can have productivity, so we can continue to afford and provide the very services we promised? No, that would require math and thinking and policy. It's not good storytelling, is it, Mr. Speaker? Look, it's also one of the reasons I was so enraged on the intellectual lazy I thought that the Senate, and look, this is where I'm being a bit sarcastic, if not mean. At least the House, and it's not perfect, there's a number of things I'm unhappy with, and leadership still doesn't have my vote on it until I get some agreements that we're able to move policy to start changing some of these numbers. But I've shown up with the policy. I'm not just moving my mouth. We put it on paper, we introduced them as bills. But you look at the charts of what the Senate unwillingness to actually put policy into their budget reconciliation. And the reason we have to demonstrate a level of fiscal discipline. If you care about poor people, if you care about economic growth, if you care about my kids, if you care about your retirement, if you care about what this government provides to society, at some point we got to figure out how to pay for it. But what happens when interest? CBO says when we finish this fiscal year, U.S. debt will be at $37.2 trillion. We have to take to market this year in just refinancing, and I'm not counting the short roll on the short end of the curve if you want to geek out. I think we're going to bring $9 trillion to market. We're probably going to bring another $2.3 trillion of new issuances and start to see where the United States is interest rate-wise. We start seeing Greece and other countries having substantially lower interest rates than us. That should set off an alarm. Do you want the money to go to the world's bond markets? You do realize convincing the world debt markets that we're creditworthy, that we're being disciplined, that we're doing things, just that differential is more money than everything that's being debated here. How many people, when just 1 point of interest, 1 point differential here is over $3 trillion, that would solve a lot of this debate, wouldn't it? We can actually get those types of bond rates if we demonstrate to the world we're creditworthy, we're being disciplined, we're being sensible, we see our long term, and we're actually understanding the honesty of our demographics. But instead, a bunch of the brain trust here in Washington spends their time attacking Moody's for downgrading us and telling the truth. Problem is, if you actually read their document, it's the truth. And for everyone out there, it thinks balancing the budget and doing those things is simple. If you actually listen to folks from the last administration, this administration, the fantasy goal is just to get to 3% of debt to GDP, not 7, not, heaven forbid, in 9 budget years being at 9%. But if you got 3%, you're more sustainable. But you got to stop the fantasy of saying, well, we're going to cut it all with a non-defense discretionary. Non-defense discretionary is 12% of our spending. Almost everything you think of as government, the Park Service, the FBI, the White House, our salaries here, that's in this 12%. Interest on the debt is every bit as big as all the non-defense discretionary. And actually, real interest on the debt, if you add up everything, is about $1.2 trillion this year. Because remember, when we borrow money from the trust funds, we got to pay it interest and pay it back. And then, for those who are willing to run around here and interested in having discussions on Medicaid, remember, Medicaid is the program that was designed for indigent populations, for women, children, infants. But yet, you hear almost protests from the left. So here's a $2.5 billion fraud in Medicaid in Arizona, where they exploited tribal members, abused them, recruited them off our tribal communities, put them in sober living homes, bled the system for money. It took years because in a system that has the incentive where you're doing provider taxes and more of that money with the raising the cost, and it ends up in the general fund of your state. We should be ashamed that these types of scams were allowed to bleed money that should have been going to people that needed the help. Look, if we don't get an alignment of policy, the cost, and how these things can actually work, Mr. Speaker, I think we're going to continue to live in this world where our debates mean nothing here. They're just based on feelings, exploitation of our voters, tell them things that are actually mathematically not true, but it's great politics. And right now, this place seems to give so much more about winning the next election than the survival of this republic and its economy, and its people and its prosperity. Is prosperity moral? There's a path where we can meet our obligations, help our brothers and sisters that need the help, and not scare the hell out of the very people that we turn to every single day, because this government borrows $9 billion a day. $72,000 a second. Next year, it's going to be close to $82,000 a second. In 9 years, it's approaching $100,000 a second. And so often, the discussion behind these microphones are things that set off your anger, and they're mathematical fantasies. If I get one more person that says, I saw on cable news this, why don't you fix it? And say, happy to fix it. But you do realize, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Okay, fine. If that's, I think that calculated to paying for 2 hours, 15 minutes of borrowing an entire year. The lack of understanding of the scale of this math. So, Mr. Speaker, there's hope. There's a way you can make this work. But not until the calculator's pulled out and the morality that prosperity is the goal, and it's the moral thing to do. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I apologize to anyone I hurt your feelings. Send me a note. I'll write you an apology note. That does seem, I seem to write a lot of apology notes. Look, I continue to be mad at both parties and almost everyone around here because we not willing to do the math. But there's a way you can make this work. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2025, the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Schreier, is recognized for 60 minutes as the